Welcome, guys. Welcome to our winter sowing class. This is always such an exciting class. It's a little weird. This was actually the last class that we taught last year in person. So normally we have about 30 people that come to our classroom here in central New Jersey. We do this program for them, then we do a little demo, and then we allow them to plant their winter sowing jugs right in the classroom. So although I love that and I love being able to work with gardeners hands-on in person, we're able to address so many more people this year because of this virtual platform. So there was something like 600 people signed up for this class today. I already see people posting they're from Canada. We have had participants from Australia, Ireland, California. So it's really wonderful that we're able to teach such a broad span of people across the globe. And I'm glad that you guys are here with me this morning. So a couple things. I am going to start sharing my screen in a moment, and I'll go through the presentation, and then I have a little video where I demonstrate how to plant these winter sowing. So I just want to show you, this is a gallon plastic water jug. When you get to this point in your life that I'm at, you start to judge people's recycling. And I drive around on recycling day, and even though the conservationist and an environmentalist in me really hates when people buy water in plastic jugs like this, because we all know plastic is just so horrible for our world and not really recyclable, even though we thought it was. When I find these plastic water jugs, I rejoice, get out of my car, throw them in my trunk, and save them. And it's become an addiction of me and my fellow gardeners here at the community garden, because these water jugs don't have any smell in them, and you can plant them without having to clean them. That being said, you can all, of course, use juice jugs and milk and all that kind of stuff, but I just wanted to show you, gardeners are a little crazy sometimes, and we start judging the recycling content. Okay, so in the chat function right now, if you go up there, you'll see our email address is cj@dukefarms.org. There's also a Google Drive link. If you click on that link, there's a notes page that you can download, you can use today, you can use another day, you can print it out, share it with your friends, whatever you're gonna do. And that has the basic notes from today's program so that you don't have to furiously jot down notes. But of course, later on, you can always reach back out to me if you need clarification or have questions. I wanted to give recognition to two really important people today. Number one is Mary. So Mary is here with me this morning, and she is going to come on live for you guys later in this presentation. Mary has done a lot of winter sowing, and I wanted her to share some of her successes and failures with you, some of the tips that she's learned over the years. Because that's really, we know the best way to learn gardening is just to kind of do it and then, figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. Each person is a little bit different. So she's going to share that. And I wanted to also recognize my gardener and one of our garden docents here at Duke Farms, which is Melissa Pafiakis. I don't think she's here with us today, but she normally teaches this class. So most of these pictures and the content are from her. She's created this content for us, so I always want to recognize her. She wasn't able to join us this morning virtually to do this talk, so I'm going to do my best. I'm not as good at winter sowing as she is, but I think I can get through this program, so I just wanted to recognize her. Okay, so that being said, Mary's going to be kind of monitoring the question and answer and the chat. She'll answer some of those questions. She can interrupt me. Mary, you can unmute yourself if you have a question you need me to go back to. And then at the end of the program, if we have extra time, we'll try to answer a few of those questions and do the best that we can. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and start this PowerPoint. I'm going to actually turn off my video so that we disappear from the corner. Go ahead. Okay, so here we are, winter sowing. Normally at this point of the program, I would say, how many of you have ever heard of winter sowing, or how many of you have ever tried winter sowing? I can't do that now, so just answer me virtually from your homes across the world. It's a really fun technique where you're actually going to, it's seed starting is what it is. But instead of starting seeds inside in your house, under the growing lights or in windows and taking up a lot of indoor space, you actually can utilize your outside space. And so it becomes a really fun technique because Since there's unlimited space, and because this is a really cheap method of starting seeds, you can start, 10 to 20 times 100 times more seeds than you normally would in a normal growing season. So basically, you're going to find what we like to affectionately call mini greenhouses. And I showed you the gallon water bottle that I use. That's my favorite mini greenhouse. But you can, of course, sort through recyclables to find any kind of plastic container that you can use for your winter sowing. And you'll start to judge people's recycling just as I judge people's recycling. You basically plant your seeds in those mini greenhouses. You put them outside right in the freezing cold temperatures. You could do it today and leave them outside in a pile of snow. Basically, the seeds will start on their own as soon as the temperature and moisture, moisture level is appropriate to break the dormancy of the seeds. They'll start on their own and they'll grow outside. And then when you're ready, you just kind of pop them in the ground. So it's a very easy, almost foolproof. We're going to talk about some of the fails that we've had over the years, but it's a really easy way to start some seeds. I'm getting some notifications that some people are raising hand. We actually can't talk to you guys. So instead of using the raise hand function, just use the Q&A or the chat if you have a question. Okay, so what are the benefits? So as I said, you may already be or maybe thinking about starting seeds inside under grow lights in the plastic, Jiffy trays or whatever it is. And I do that, and that is how I start most of my vegetables, and that's definitely a wonderful way. And I am actually teaching a class on that type of seed starting on March 1st, webinar style. So if you want to learn more about that type of seed starting, please join us for that class in 2 weeks. The benefits of using this winter sowing method, and I mentioned a few already, it's outside, so you're not restricted by space. It's very low cost. There's no electricity involved in this, whereas you might be running grow lights for indoor seed starting normally. You're using the outside, the sun as your energy for winter sowing. You don't need to stick to a specific calendar, which might be my favorite part about this. And that's because in January and February, I am literally desperate to get my hands in soil. I don't know about you guys, but the winter is long for me. I suffer from that seasonal affective disorder, and I feel sometimes like I'm pacing around my house, like not knowing what to do with myself because I don't have an overwhelming list of outdoor chores. So with this winter sowing, it kind of gives me something to do. I buy some soil, I hunt around people's recycling, and I start these seeds. And because I can do it in January, February, and into March, it sort of fills that gap where normal seed starting wouldn't be happening yet, and certainly not normal gardening. Okay, so here's the supplies that you'll need. If you guys have you might have all this stuff on hand today and you can get started today. Otherwise, it's really easy to sort of collect this material, very inexpensive. You're gonna need seeds. These are the normal seeds that you would normally use for any sort of winter sowing. Anything goes, perennial, annual, vegetable, flower, really anything works. Containers, you need to go find some plastic containers that you're gonna start your seeds in. You need some kind of seed starting soil. So you're either going to get something that's actually called seed starting, you can get germinating mix, you can get potting soil. Well, you want to make sure that your soil is nice and fluffy and loose. My friend Melissa P suggests that you don't get any soil that indicates its moisture control because that doesn't work out so well for her in the jugs. Sometimes I get a bag of seed starting mix and I open it up, and it's I feel like it's heavy. Once I get it wet and watered down, it feels just like really heavy. And if that happens, I usually buy myself a bag of perlite or vermiculite and just mix it into the seed starting mix. Those two items will really significantly lighten up your seed starting mix. You can also use coconut coir or even sphagnum peat moss. You can add to your seed starting mix if it feels heavy. It depends, like different brands. I find some I really love, they're very light, and others are a little bit heavier. So you want to make sure it's nice and light enough so that it holds the water, but it doesn't get like mold or fungus in it. You're going to need a nice sharp pair of scissors to cut open these mini greenhouses. You do need to add some drainage holes. So I usually use a drill with a fat drill bit. just to drill about 4 holes in the bottom of my container. Of course, it depends how big your container is. You can do more or less. You can also use, just a pair of scissors to try to cut a hole. Some people have used like melting tools, like, I forget what they're called. I know Melissa had one. What was just like a metal rod that you plug in and basically burn a hole in the bottom of the container. So whatever you have on hand that makes the most sense. A drill, in my opinion, is the easiest and safest. You're going to need a good strong roll of duct tape, maybe several, depending on how many jugs you start. And you're going to need a Sharpie marker or a wax pen, something that is not going to fade over the winter in the outdoor elements and with all that moisture. So the industrial strength Sharpie markers work really well. So I encourage you to buy. I would not use a regular pen or pencil for this. We do put plastic plant tags inside the containers. You can use wood, but sometimes the wood fades, like it gets really wet and then the color will run. So sometimes plastic is better. And you can use something recycled. Like I've heard, I think Melissa was saying she used some old plastic spoons or mini blinds. Like someone was throwing away a mini blind, so she cut up the little plastic slats and made plastic plant tags. So she is super creative when it comes to planting her garden as cheaply as possible. And I love that about her. Okay, so choosing your seeds, again, anything. We in New Jersey here, I'm in Somerset County, central New Jersey. We are zone 6. So any seeds that would grow in this type of climate, we're not starting anything tropical here in our zone. No pomegranates, lemons, clementines, all that kind of stuff. But a wide range of vegetables and fruits can be started this way. You can also, as I mentioned before, use perennials. So I am trained in ecology, so we talk a lot about using native plants in the landscape and how that's much better for pollinators and birds and so forth, rather than using invasive plants or even just like non-native plants. So if you want to do some research on what's native in your area of the world, you can either buy seeds, or maybe you have collected seeds over the from the previous fall. And you can plant them in these winter sowing jugs as well. And those most of the time are perennial in nature. You can also start herbs in these winter sowing jugs, which is really fun for me because herb plants are quite expensive. So if you want to buy a rosemary, a sage, a lavender, they're going to end up being like $4 a piece. Whereas if you can buy a pack of seeds, and really you only need like a couple seeds, because you only need a couple, or maybe even just one rosemary, sage, that type of thing. Maybe you want to share with a bunch of friends and buy a couple packs of seeds, and then just share those and plant herbs. They work really well. I've done rosemary, I've done lavender, I've done mint, sage. So all of those things that normally to start under the lights are a little bit tricky. Throw in a jug. That way, if it fails, you don't have to worry. It didn't take up much space. It was just a little bit of soil. That was your investment. I also encourage you to think about using annual plants, and again, the jugs are a great place to do that. So zinnias and cosmos and all kinds of marigolds, things like that, that you could just direct sow in the ground, some of those, but others you do have to start in advance. I love having them started as plants because then I can see where I'm placing them. I can make sure I'm watering them. I remember where they are once I get them in the ground. So I love to do all kinds of flowers in my winter sowing jugs as well. And I think I mentioned everything. So vegetables, annual flowers, perennial plants, herbs. That's kind of the list that I have. Okay, so how do you go about choosing a container? How do you start judging people's recycling the way that I do? So the number one thing that you're looking for is something that is food grade. So I would encourage you to avoid using things that had any kind of chemical in them, including like laundry detergent or dish soap. Even though that stuff is non-toxic, I would avoid doing that. I would use food grade plastic, because plastics can actually biodegrade, and some of the chemicals in them can actually leach into whatever they're holding. And so I think the risk is minimal, but we wouldn't want anything to leach into your soil that could come into your plant. Again, I think the risk is minimal, but there's so much food grade plastic out there that I would just encourage you to use those. So soda bottles, juice bottles, milk, water, iced tea, anything like that works very well. The next thing, you need to make sure that your jugs are translucent or transparent. So translucent meaning like the milk ones, like you can sort of see through them. And then you can also, of course, use clear plastic like a soda bottle, but it needs to not be solid white. So I think like at Costco, the milk containers are that opaque white, and you wouldn't want to use that because the sun wouldn't be able to get through there. It needs to be something that's easy to cut. And we've learned this over the years because as we teach this class every year, people will come in with different types of jugs. And some of them are a really heavy duty plastic, like some of the orange juice containers or like an Arizona iced tea, very difficult to cut in half. The giant Poland Spring. So if you guys have like a water cooler somewhere, we've had people inquire about using those enormous, water bottles that invert onto water coolers. They really are hard to cut as well. If you had someone really handy that had like a reciprocal saw that could cut it while being safe, you could try it. But again, these smaller type jugs are just much easier to cut them in half and they go really quickly. We encourage you to get creative and ask around. And this is another thing that Melissa P has educated us on. She says you can go to Dunkin' Donuts and literally ask them to save their milk. They actually use like regular gallon milk containers. You can go to Starbucks and ask them. You can, of course, find out your local recycling day and get out, try to beat the trucks and collect jugs that way. There's Facebook pages where, there's swaps and trades. You can ask people if they will save their jugs for you. So there's lots of ways. And I think she each year does upwards of like 120 jugs in her yard. So I am not that addicted, but I do usually about 20. And like I said, I mostly concentrate on flowers and herbs in my winter sowing jugs. This picture on the right is of Melissa's backyard, and that was like the start to her season. So she does many more jugs than that. But you can see on the right, she has some, they look like either 5-gallon like spackle buckets, and if you can buy food grade buckets of that size for compost and things like that. And also plant containers, just like pots that you would buy a large plant at the nursery. She uses those to start some of her root crops. So root crops, many of them don't like to be transplanted. And so she uses those containers and she wraps them in plastic, as you can see. And then when it comes warm enough, she just unwraps them and leaves them in place. So actually doesn't even transplant them. So that's an option for you as well. So just get really creative, look around your house and yard and think how you can accommodate some extra seed starting in stuff that you already have on hand. Okay, so here's a pictorial description of the process that you're going to go through. If you have anything other than a water jug, and especially if you're using milk, you do want to make sure you clean it because that sour milk smell can get really disgusting and it's going to encourage mold or mildew in your containers. So definitely clean it, whether it's hot soap and water, or you can use this vinegar water solution that is very effective when it comes to cleaning out milk and getting rid of that smell. You're going to drill some holes in the bottom. As I said, I use a regular drill like the one pictured. I do about 5 holes. You can do more. She recommends 6 to 8 holes, depending on how big they are, just enough so that the water is not sitting in the containers and it's going to, anytime it rains or snows, the water is going to drain out the bottom. It's important that you do not put the caps back on. So you just discard the caps. You won't need them anymore for this process. That is where your plant and your mini greenhouse is going to breathe. And that's where the water and moisture is going to come from. So you leave those caps off. You're going to get your nice fluffy potting soil. I recommend pre-moistening it. So get yourself either a bowl or a large Rubbermaid and get that soil pre-moistened. So that it kind of, holds together a little bit when you squeeze on it, not so that it's dripping wet. But a lot of times soil right out of the container is very, very dry. And it's hard, really absorbs a lot of water. So get the bulk of that soil moist before you fill your containers. You're going to plant, you're going to cut. Oh, I left the cutting off of this slide. I just realized that. You're going to cut your container in half, leaving a hinge on there. So you see this picture is using a jug with a handle we usually leave the handle attached so that the lid can flip up and then flip back closed. If you're using a juice container, just leave, you know, some part of it attached so that it's not completely two separate pieces. You are going to fill with soil, about 3 to 4 inches of soil in the bottom. And then you're going to plant your seeds. Now, depending on what kind of seeds you're planting, you can fit about 9 in a gallon-sized jug like this, 3 rows of 3. But if it's flowers, sometimes I just sprinkle them over the surface. Lettuce too, I might just sprinkle over the surface and not even worry about actually planting a hole. So it's up to you however you want to handle it. And you can put 1 seed in the hole if you do holes, or you can do 2 and then thin them out. It's your call, really. I highly recommend adding an interior garden label. So like I said, you can get yourself a plastic or a wood label. Write the name of the crop, including the variety, the day that you started it, because sometimes that's important to know for future, you know, sort of record keeping when you started something, because if it failed, then you know that wasn't a good time of year to start that for whatever reason. And I would tuck that label inside of there. You also could just write on the inside of the container, but you're risking, you know, you're watering it and it's sitting in the moisture, so it could wash off or wear down a little bit. So up to you. Once you're done with the planting, cover your seeds up a little bit if there's seeds that need to be covered. Lettuce does not need to be covered, so you can, and some flowers as well, you can just sprinkle without covering them. You're not going to water it yet. What you're going to do is you're going to close that hinged lid and you're going to tape it up with duct tape, nice and tight. So you actually, there's no opening anymore. You want to make sure you seal it 100% because, but what you want in order to create this greenhouse effect is it to create very, very moist habitat with water condensing on the inside of the plastic container. I usually label the outside as well so that I know which order to open them, because if I have, you know, lettuce in one container and tomatoes in another, I'm going to open the lettuce much earlier than I'm going to open the tomatoes. And so I want the label on the outside. I usually just write that right on the surface of the plastic. At that point, I go ahead and water them thoroughly. I usually set up, you know, maybe I'll do 6 or 8 jugs at a clip, set them all up, get them all taped, and then use my hose to just water them thoroughly. You want to water them until they're, you know, a nice heavy weight so that the soil has absorbed enough water in order to keep it. Usually, once you water it the one time in the winter, you don't have to water it much at all until it starts warming up in like late March, early April. So you can check on the temperature or the amount of water in the container by how heavy it is. Once you're done with that, and actually even before you water, you can get them all placed where you want them to be. And just somewhere sunny and somewhere safe. So I wouldn't necessarily place them on top of like a patio table because they could blow off. And once they blow off, they're pretty much ruined. I would place them out of a place where, you know, if you have a dog or something that is going to be running around, you don't want these guys getting disturbed and knocked over, because that's going to ruin the whole process if the seeds get jostled from the soil. So just somewhere safe, somewhere perfectly sunny. And so that's going to warm them a lot, because it is like creating a little greenhouse effect. And then close enough to your hose so that, you know, over the process of the next couple of months, you can get them watered easily if needed. So I wouldn't put them like, you know, a half a mile from my house, because it's much more difficult to drag the hose out there every time. I might put them closer to my house. Some people, as in the pictures, just place the jugs right in their garden beds maybe. And that makes for a nice, secure, sunny spot. Okay, so watering, you can see in these pictures the condensation on the inside of the containers. That condensation is key to the success of this project. That means that your containers are warming and that the water in the soil is evaporating and that it's condensing on the inside. And basically, then it rains back down on top of your plants. And so there's this cycle happening inside of these little terrariums. If at any point you go out and check your containers, and of course in the winter, like I said, I'm bored. So I might check these guys every single day. If it looks like 1 or 2 or all of them are missing this condensation, or they feel very light when you pick them up, it's time to water. So the best thing to do is get just like a regular spray hose and spray the top. You don't want to hit them too hard, like the hose without a nozzle, like right in that little hole, because of course that's going to explode the soil and seeds in there. And then you're going to, again, ruin this whole experiment. And I think Mary has some recommendations on watering when we get to her. Okay, so frost. Now we're in February. There is, where I live, still about a foot of snow outside in my backyard, and it's supposed to ice again later today and snow several times this week. This is the coldest, most snowy winter we've had, probably in 10 years, maybe even longer than that. I can't remember a time when it has been this much snow on the ground for this long. It doesn't matter. These guys can sit outside in the snow and they'll be perfectly happy. They're not going to germinate yet. It's too cold, and seeds, in order to break dormancy, need warmth and they need moisture. So they have moisture in these containers, but if it's this cold, they're not going to germinate. They're going to germinate naturally in time once the temperature starts to warm. So don't worry about, like, in a week or 2 weeks, if nothing's germinated, it's not necessarily a bad sign. They will germinate when they're ready. As long as they have not germinated, you do not need to worry about the cold. However, once they start to pop up, then you need to pay a little bit of attention. So what you need to do is learn the difference between cold hardy plants and warm season or tender plants. So cold hardy plants are things like lettuce, broccoli, kale, most of those herbs, some flowers, let's see, root crops are cold hardy, leeks, onions. And your tender season or warm season crops are those Mediterranean crops: tomatoes, peppers, basil, eggplant, zucchini, all the squashes. So if as sprouts start to come, if the temperature at night is going to drop under about 25 degrees, Melissa recommends throwing a blanket or some kind of sheet or something over your containers and then taking it off the next day. And for those tender crops, if the temperature drops to below 40, she recommends giving them a cover. She recommends do not bring them inside, but just throw some material over the top of them. It's for this reason that we recommend starting some of those tender crops in March instead of this early, so maybe in early March, because then once they start to germinate, you're not really at risk. We want to avoid having to run outside and throw blankets onto our winter sowing jugs, especially if you have over 100 like she does. But you can do that, and if you forget, they'll probably be okay, especially the cold hardy guys. But if it goes down in the teens, you do risk them getting frostbitten or dying. Okay, so here's the cool season crops that I just mentioned. You can plant these guys usually about 2 to 4 weeks before your last frost date. For us here in Zone 6 in New Jersey, our last frost date is approximately May 15th. So I usually start setting out my cool season crops around April 15th. So what I would probably do is open up my containers about a week before that, see how they're doing. If they haven't sprouted yet, I would certainly leave them closed. I want to keep them in that greenhouse situation until they've sprouted. And some, if you keep going and maybe every week add jugs, the beginning of April, you may have just planted something a week ago and you want to leave it sealed up. You can certainly leave it sealed up longer than that April 15th or 4 weeks before your last frost date. That would be the earliest point at which you want to open them. You can open them up. You can plant them that same day if you're ready. I usually open them up about a week before, give them a little, let them get acclimated to the wind and the direct sun, because they've been in these translucent containers. If the temperature, again, if it's going to drop, if they're still in the containers, or even if they're in the ground, if the temperature is going to go under 25, I would go ahead and throw a blanket or a row cover or something on top of them. But it's important to never bring these containers inside, because then they're going to ruin that hardiness that they've developed by growing directly outdoors. For your warm season crops, you're going to wait until that last frost date. So you might be able to open them up a week before that, but again, you got to watch the temperature, make sure it's not going to drop below 40 degrees at night, because you don't want to get into those freezing temperatures. That is going to quickly damage these tender crops, such as basil, zucchini, tomatoes, that type of thing. The other end of the coin is, well, I'm ready to plant everything. It's May 15th. I have, 100 jugs still left that I haven't opened. You want to make sure you get them opened once that last frost date comes, again, unless they haven't sprouted. But after that last frost date, I would get everything opened, even if you're not ready to plant it yet. Certainly, if the outdoor temperature reaches like into, I said 80 here, it's really more like in the 70s, because inside these containers, if it gets in the 70s, it's going to get really much warmer. So once your temperatures, if the daytime temperatures, and they do sometimes in May here in New Jersey, reach into the 70s, I would get those opened, because if they get too hot, they are going to sizzle up and fry. And of course, if they're reaching out the top of the container, that's also a good indication to get those containers opened and let that plant get inside. Now, again, with warm season tender crops, whether you plant them outside or whether they're still in the jugs, under 40 degrees, you do want to throw a blanket over top of them or a row cover. How to transplant. So basically, you're going to end up with this soil block. You can actually almost take the whole like soil chunk out. It'll be filled with roots. If it's not, you can just kind of grab, chunks of plants. You can pull them apart and separate them. Things like lettuce, you can plant chunks or flowers. Things like a tomato or a kale, where you want individual plants, you can either try to separate them and plant them both, or trim one and just leave the strongest plant. So pretty much the same technique as transplanting anything from a seed starting tray. The only difference would be that you might have like larger chunks, because from these little greenhouses, you may have heavily seeded. So you can pull them apart. They're pretty hardy to get them apart. You're not really going to damage them. So I kind of touched on this before, but there's some unique considerations. So root crops, this is a picture of carrots. It also would pertain to something like parsnips, radishes. I'm trying to think if there's other ones that don't like beets are okay being transplanted, but carrots and radish definitely, and parsnip do not want to be transplanted. So plant them if you want to winter sow them. Plant them in large containers that they're going to grow their entire life cycle in. So you're just going to leave them in there. You're going to wrap them with that plastic, as was in the first slide. Cover them somehow with a translucent plastic material, and leave them there. And then once you get to that mid-April, or a couple weeks before your last frost date, that's when you're going to uncover them, because they are definitely a hardy crop. Native plants, this is a picture of milkweed. It's butterfly weed or butterfly plant. Again, these guys are perennials, most of our native plants. Many of them require what's called cold stratification. Because they're perennial, their natural cycle would be to drop the seeds in the fall. They would sit on the ground all winter and get this cold stratification, and then they would germinate in the spring. So if you have collected seeds of these perennial native plants, and you try to start them in seed trays in your house, they may not germinate because they haven't been cold stratified. So winter sowing is literally the perfect way to start these guys. And you can do it as early as you possibly can. You can do it in December if you wanted to, because leaving them outside in the cold, the longer you leave them outside, the better chance you're going to have at germination. So I love to collect these. And if you have native plants growing in your landscape, go ahead and start saving seeds from them and pop them in the jugs next year. And you can quickly and very cheaply multiply the amount of plants that you have. These are some of the pictures that Melissa has showed us. She plants almost her entire garden by winter sowing and generates hundreds of pounds of produce. She warns us that the plants that a lot of times when she opens the jug for things like peppers and tomatoes, things that are really require a lot of warmth to get going, they may be smaller than you're used to. Like they're going to be smaller than the plants that you buy at the nursery, but they will certainly catch up. And she has never had any issue with producing lots and lots of vegetables. As I said, I usually stick to flowers and herbs in my jug, so I don't have too much experience with vegetables, but you should be successful. Just a couple of fails. So really cheap soil or very, very heavy soil can sometimes cause an issue. Old seeds, obviously, that's for anything, anytime you want to plant. If you have seeds that are older than 5 years old, oftentimes they'll germinate at a lower rate. Watering too powerfully or any kind of disruption to the soil in the container can be a problem. The fourth picture, bolting or frying plants. So sometimes this is a picture of spinach. And because spinach prefers that cold weather, I left it in the jug too long. This was one that I did try to winter sow, and it was looking gorgeous in like the end of March. I should have left the container opened. I closed it back up, and then it got too warm, and just, you could see it's very yellow and chlorotic, and it got fried, and it just produced a flower and never really grew very well for me at all. So that was kind of a bummer. So keep that in mind. You know, the containers do get very warm. We do sometimes have an issue with this, what I call a midwinter warm up. So sometimes we'll get a couple days stretch of warm weather in February, and that can make some plants germinate, and then all of a sudden it gets very cold. And that's really when you have to be wary of your nighttime temperatures, if they're already germinated. And so that's kind of a pain for us when that happens. We get like this random 80-degree February day, and then it gets cold again. So beware of that. This is just a quick cost analysis. You know, why it's so affordable, because really the only thing you're going to be buying potting soil, whether you're starting inside or outside. You're going to have to buy markers to label your plants anyway, and seeds. So really the only extra cost is the duct tape. And that is, you know, very inexpensive. So this is a way, again, to just multiply your effort and get a lot of productivity out of your seed starting. These are a couple resources, and I can mail out or email you guys these resources, or if you want to kind of snap a picture on your phone, that would be fine as well. Okay, so I just want to remind people, you know, of our copyright policy. Again, if you want to go back to that chat and download the, where is the chat? I can't see it on here. Download that. I'm going to repost it. No, I can't do it from here. Well, anyway, I can repost it in a moment, the handout with the notes. What I'm going to do right now is go ahead and stop my share. I have a quick video for you that I am going to play, just sort of demonstrating the seed starting, and then I'm going to ask Mary to kind of talk a little bit. So here we go. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Give me one more second. I want to make sure the sound is turned on. Okay, here we go.
Hey everybody, it's a beautiful February day. The ground is covered in snow. There's not too many gardening tasks that we could accomplish at this time of year. It's a little bit of seed starting that can happen inside. But for the most part, we're just sort of waiting and dreaming about our gardens. There is a task that you guys get to get started on right now that will give you sort of that satisfaction of getting your fingers in the dirt, and also will benefit your garden in the spring. And that is called winter sowing. So winter sowing is this technique where you take sort of like old recycled materials, reuse them, upcycle them, and use them as seed starting kits that you literally place outside and leave in the snow for the rest of the winter, and let the seeds start naturally as the soil warms in here. So I'm going to take you through this process. It's very simple. It starts with some kind of recycled plastic jug. You want to make sure it's food grade. You want to make sure it's translucent or transparent, so no like solid white milk jugs or anything like that. And you want to make sure it's not too thick, because you're going to need to cut it. And some of those like larger Poland Spring giant water jugs are really hard to get through. You might end up hurting yourself. So I love these just like gallon milk or water jugs. They're really easy, soft plastic to get through. Before we actually cut it, we're actually going to drill some drainage holes in the bottom. And to do that, I usually just use a regular old drill. You could use just scissors to poke holes. Just be careful. And it's easier to do before you cut it. So I'm going to go ahead and drill a couple holes. Usually drill about 5 holes in the bottom here, just so that the water doesn't accumulate and sit in here and cause any rotting or molding. Okay, after that's done, we're going to cut the jug in half. But when you cut it, you're going to leave part of it attached. Now, for a milk jug, I have this handle. I usually leave the handle attached. If it's juice, you could pick whichever side makes the most sense. Sometimes it helps to actually drill a hole to get started with the cutting, just so you don't have to hurt, poke through. drill a hole, get my sharp scissors, and cut all the way around. I'm going to cut about maybe 3 to 4 inches up from the bottom. Try to be as straight as possible. And these jugs were just taken out of recycling. Literally go around on recycling day and grab people's plastic bottles. Okay. So this is cut in half, and as you can see, it kind of made like a hinge like this. Okay, so I've got my holes, I've got my top hinge. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill it with soil. Any kind of potting or seed starting soil will be fine. It's important that it's pre-moistened. So a lot of times when you buy the bag soil, it's really dry, almost like dusty. It's really helpful if you put it in a container or even just a bowl, pour water into it, really work it with your hands and get it pre-moistened, because once it's in here, it's hard to get it moist if it's that dry. I'm just put several handfuls in here. So sort of almost fill up the bottom of my container, pressing it down, removing air pockets, especially along the edges, so we get kind of a flat surface for our soil. Okay, so what can you plant in these winter sowing containers? Pretty much anything. I personally love to plant perennial plants, so some of the native wildflowers, they do really well in here. I love to plant herbs in here because I only want a few herbs here and there, and you can grow them very easy from seed in these containers. Things like lavender, rosemary, chives, sage. I've done mint. That works really well. I love annual flowers in here because I don't want to take room under my grow lights to do too many annual flowers. So you can just like stick a bunch in here for almost, zero money and no space taken up inside. You can grow all kinds of different vegetables. You just have to play around with it. See which ones you like the best to start in this way. I'm going to take my gloves off for the next step. Today I'm going to be planting parsley. So just regular giant Italian parsley. I love parsley. I like to tuck it around in lots of different places in my yard. So I'm going to get my seeds out. So you can do this a couple different ways, I guess. If it's a plant that you really want to grow nice and big on its own, you can actually poke individual holes in here, maybe like 5 holes. If it's a bigger plant, 9 holes if it's smaller. For something like this, which I really can fit a lot in, I guess 9 holes still might work. You could also just kind of sprinkle it across the surface. I do that a lot of times for wildflowers and annuals. I'll just kind of sprinkle them in there, and then however they come up, I just kind of plant them in hunks. So I put several seeds in each of the 9 holes. I'm just going to cover it gently. Just kind of press it down in there. I've already pre-moistened it, so I don't need to water it right at the moment. I am going to tuck a tag in here though, because a lot of times we're going to label the outside, but if it wears off, you want to back up. So I'm going to label this with the name and the date. Giant Italian parsley. And today is February 12th. I'm going to stick it in here. Okay, done with my planting. I'm going to close up my jug. Next step is to actually tape it shut with duct tape. You want to use duct tape, and you want to cover the entire the hole that you cut. And it's important that the container be dry, which is why I do not water them before I tape it shut, because the duct tape will not stick to a wet surface. So I want to make sure we go all the way around so it's sealed shut. Sometimes the cold weather makes it hard to stick as well, but all right. I'm going to actually put an extra piece on this side. You have an indent on the side, sometimes it like sticks out, so you just kind of I'll show you, one more piece of duct tape up here on the flat edge. Sometimes sticks a little better. And now the whole thing is sealed, and you're not going to replace the cap. This is the place where your watering is going to go. That's where all your respiration is going to happen. But since it's such a tiny opening, it's actually going to hold a lot of moisture and warmth in here, just from the water that we add and the plant doing its thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and label the outside as well. So use like a permanent marker or something. These industrial strength ones work really well. All right, so now last step is to water it. Now, if you're doing a bunch of these, I would go ahead, I sort of would set it up like an assembly line, holes, soil, plant all the seeds and labels, tape them all up, and then you could actually put them all on the ground and use your hose to water them. Since I only have one, I just brought my little watering can out, kind of water it gently along the sides. You want to get moisture in there, but not flood the plant. Okay, and you can kind of feel it. It'll get nice and heavy with moisture. Be gentle though, because these, you don't want to displace the seeds in there. Okay, so that's good. Now what's going to happen is I'm just going to find a safe place out here, nice and sunny, but protected from like squirrels and things like that. It can sit right in the snow. It doesn't matter if it snows on top of it. It doesn't matter if it rains on top of it. So it can sit here dormant. It has moisture in there. Once it gets enough warmth in order to break dormancy, the seeds will sprout. Once they sprout, then you need to sort of start to pay attention to the weather. So I'm normally starting these containers maybe in January, usually often in February. That's the time when I really start to ramp up my winter sowing. If they sprout and then the temperature really dips really low, like below 25 degrees for these hardy plants, I would throw a cover over them, like a row cover or just like a blanket or something, just to make sure, because sometimes if they sprout, the baby new leaves, if it goes really cold, they could burn and die on you. So just kind of keep aware for those real low temperatures. And go ahead and experiment with lots of different kinds of vegetables, fruits, flowers, perennials, anything you can imagine. So happy winter sowing.
Okay, we are back. I'm going to ask Mary, if you're listening, if you want to turn on your screen. Hi, how are you? So why don't you share, what are some of your experiences? I know you do a lot of winter sowing.
Yes, and I learned everything from Melissa and Melissa P. I took this course in 2017 and I am cheap. So that is the reason I did it. I did not want to invest in any amount of lights or have it in my basement, and I can't start things in windows because I live in a shady area. So what Melissa said as far as setting things up and doing an assembly line, make sure you label as you go though, if you're doing an assembly line. One year I kind of got messed up and the results were wonky. So you got to make sure you do that. The industrial marker is very important. If you don't use industrial marker and don't label inside and outside, things can go haywire. Watering, the best tip that I can give you for watering is this. I didn't have luck with the watering can. I disturbed the soil a lot. So one of these garden sprayers is great. Just make sure you don't use, like I wrote my chemical one, just use one that only is for water. Because I do all my gardening here at Duke's, and so I have to bring my water there. The important thing is watching your plants, like Melissa said, you know, watch the heat especially. I did have some plants burn last year, so that is.
What time of year was that, Mary?
It was May, and it was my tomato plants. So that kind of like, but they survived. I cut them back a little bit. I cut the burnt parts back and they did fine. I'm all about patience. Mother Nature will do her thing. Try anything. You know, there are a lot of the questions were, what should I plant? Plant whatever you like. Another question was about potatoes. I've never done potatoes this way. I don't know if Melissa P has, but I only start my potatoes in May in towers. So
that is interesting. What a fun question. Maybe I'll try that. I was thinking yesterday about, have we ever started garlic this way?
Someone asked that, and I said we plant our garlic in the ground. So that was one of the questions on the chat. So
I think I'll try that, just so that next year we can tell people what the response was, because I have some old potatoes in my basement that are starting to sprout. So I'm going to try that. That's a good one.
Yeah. Other questions were, you know, what should they plant? I said plant what you want. I've planted everything. The only thing I haven't started was peas. I don't know if Melissa P started her peas this way.
She has.
She has, but then I'll probably do it too.
Yeah. I think she does. I think she said she does it both ways. So she'll winter start the peas and then transplant like the hunks of peas. And then at the same time she direct sows. So she sort of has like a little bit of a head start for some.
And that's the whole thing about staggering your planting. So you can start planting. You don't have to plant all your tomatoes at the same time, or I space them out. And as far as like my fails, pretty much everything worked. Last year we were closed down here. I had jugs of lettuce. I thought they were dead. I threw them in the compost heap. And what happened was they sprouted in the compost heap. And we just dug them out of the compost heap and planted them in the giving garden in our garden. So
That's amazing.
sometimes they don't think they're going to work, and they do. And
So had they not sprouted the lettuce, or had they sprouted?
It was all dry. It didn't look like they sprouted. So they were fine. Somebody asked about old seeds. As long as they're not really old, I've had success with seeds 2-3 years old.
Yeah. And winter sowing, I feel like maybe the way to do old seeds. Literally, you could just plant the whole packet.
Right.
A couple will germinate, right? And then you're not out the whole packet.
But Melissa pretty much covered everything. Watering, make sure the soil is watered well, not real soaky, but watered well when you're starting your seeds. And just give it that light spraying of water works the best. It took me a while to learn about that.
So Mary, you start all your or you place all your jugs here at Duke, but you obviously go home then. How often do you come back to check on them and water them?
I'm here a lot, but once a week would probably be adequate, but I have nothing else to do in the winter, so it's like I'm retired. So basically just make sure you really label it, and especially if it goes outside, make sure you have the label inside. That works well. I'm trying to think what else. And just watch the plants. When they start getting big, you don't want them to start drying out. And I had to come here and cover them when it got really cold one time. But the snow, I had a picture of covered in snow, and they were fine.
Okay. So what's the sort of key for you? Melissa P, her recommendation was that 25 degrees. Do you go by that rule, or is it?
Pretty much like 30.
Okay.
If it's 30, I mean, one year I didn't do it and they were fine. It seems nature will take care of itself. And
remember, guys, it's only if they've sprouted that you have to worry. If they're just out there, with the seeds, no worries about that. I have a comment about labeling, because one year I labeled inside and forgot to label outside. And so then I had no idea which one was which to open. And then another year I labeled only outside and not inside. And then when I untaped them, I actually then cut off the lids because they were just flopping around, and then I didn't know what anything was. So really both of those labels are important in this process.
And like with tomatoes and peppers, I actually open the lids and keep them on for a while. And then when they're starting to get a little more hardy, I literally cut the lids off. And sometimes I could even transplant them into larger pots. And that works well. My plants were smaller, and people in the garden love to look at my experiment, as they call it, and they catch up real quick. They may be a little smaller than something you buy, but they will catch up.
That's
because they've been outside.
Yeah, because I was really disappointed in my tomatoes one year, and then it's like they grow so fast.
They do, and that's when I use the fertilizer. I do not use fertilizer when I'm planting.
Okay.
I do put in worm castings, because that was
in the jugs or in the
jugs. Yep.
Oh, okay.
I use worm castings because I think Melissa had mentioned that at one time that I used. So I did use worm casting.
Yeah, and some of the we should mention the soil that you use. Our community garden here is organic, and so we would tell people, the seed starting soil used should be organic, because that's how your plants are growing. So avoid things like Miracle-Gro or other synthetic fertilizers. So the soil that you buy, if it's an organic seed starting, sometimes it does have worm castings or blood meal or something in there, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's up to you if you want to try to add it. Other people, like what I do for my seeds under the grow lights, is I water them after several weeks of growing. I start watering them with a little bit of liquid fertilizer once a week. So Melissa P does not do that, though. She says she does not do any fertilizing with the water, just fertilizes, like if she's going to plant them in the ground, she usually puts a little bit in the hole.
Yes.
So all different things.
And as far as watering them, it's really how much condensation is in the jug. You don't want to overwater either when you're growing them.
Yes. Okay, so let's see if we can do a few questions. Mary, I know you said a bunch, but compost after they sprout. Sure, like you can plant most of the soil that is in your jug, you can just plant right into your garden. But if there's anything left over, then sure, you could toss it in your compost.
Some people were asking if you can put the holes in the top of the jugs.
Mhm.
I mean, that's enough in the top one. I don't think I would put many more because then it's going to take away the greenhouse effect, I think.
Yeah, and the holes in the bottom are going to help to drain it.
Right. Other questions that a lot of had. People ask what to plant. Like Melissa and I, we try anything. You know, what to plant.
Yeah.
It's what you eat, what you like.
Yeah, someone asked about Tithonia. You know, all sunflowers are very tender. So if you do them, I would just be careful, and they grow really fast once they germinate. So I would do those a little bit later. If you were going to winter sow, you know, sunflowers, I would probably wait until April to do it because they grow so fast. Let's see. Let's see. Topping the seed with coarse sand helps guard against moss or mold. I've never done that. Excuse me, I've never done that. You know, put sand on top of your soil, but you could, some people use like vermiculite for that purpose. I don't think it's needed in the winter sowing experiment though. I think you're fine because it's outside and the cold weather is going to help keep that stuff at bay as long as it's draining. So Mary, there's a question, is there anything that should not be started this way? And I can't think of anything. We named potatoes and garlic that we've never done, but as far as seeds.
I would try anything. I know Melissa tries just about everything. I do start my squash a little later, like you said, more tender plants. Plus you're not going to put them in the soil until the soil is warm enough. So you don't want to have them growing huge in the containers.
Exactly.
Someone else asked about what kind of flowers. I like to plant stuff that's expensive to buy. So a pack of seeds for lavender is a lot cheaper than trying to buy lavender plants or any other perennials. I had really a lot of success with cone flowers, with daisies, and they're so much cheaper. I'm cheap.
Yeah, well, I feel that way too, because I always want like a ton of marigolds and violas and all, you know, I love annual flowers, but a 6-pack is like, you know, $3. And then if you buy a lot, so this is just a really inexpensive way.
We have a flower garden at Duke's at the entranceway, and all of the flowers were started winter sowing last year at one of the volunteer coordinator's house. We started the jugs and she brought them to her house, and the entire garden, 2 5x30 rows of plants from, I think, about 10 jugs.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. So
somebody did ask, I want to address about using a tin container. So I wouldn't do that, partly because you definitely want the transparency for the sun to get through. These plants need sun once they start to grow. So you can't use the tin container. I suppose you could use the bottom and drill holes in it and then put a plastic, you know, like plastic cover or whatever over the top. But that's the reason. It's not because we love plastic. The reason we use these plastic jugs are those two things. We can cut them in half and we can, and they can let the sun through.
Someone asked also about the, I guess what you can buy lettuce in, and I have started lettuce in that. You just, doesn't have a lot of growth room when you use one of those lettuce containers.
Oh, like the clamshells?
Clamshells, that's it. Yep.
Yes.
I just wanted to show the scissors that I bought, which work really well. They're called EMS scissors. They will cut through chicken wire, and it's really easy to use, and they stay sharp, and they're cheap. Harbor Freight, I've got them at mostly, but I love these scissors, so I brought them with me.
Did you say they're EMS?
They're called EMS scissors.
Are they for cutting like casts and things like that? I wonder, like gauze?
I saw it on a YouTube video, and I said, let me try that, and I actually use it for chicken wire at the garden. So
wow,
these are great.
That is, I have never heard that before, Mary. I always say,
so I brought those with me too.
Every class I take, I learn something. So someone just commented, I saw they're a nurse, and that could take your finger off. So be really careful.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
we're going to sign off here. Thank you guys for joining us. I know we didn't get a chance to answer all your questions directly, but I feel like we covered most of them as I'm scanning through. If you have additional questions, you can email us. Again, that email address is CG, that stands for Community Garden. So cg@dukefarms.org. We will email out to you guys the handout that in case you didn't get to download it. And certainly keep in touch. Send us your pictures if you have successes, especially if you choose to try some potatoes and garlic. I'm interested in this new experiment. So thank you, Mary. Big shout out to Melissa Papiakis for all of her information and experimenting. And I hope to see you guys maybe, and maybe we'll see you again on March 1st in vegetable starting. So have a good one. Take care.